How many of you are familiar with the country song, Live Like You Were Dying? Tim McGraw. You know, I love country music. I gave up on country music for a while because everything was about drinking and cheating and your dog biting you and your wife leaving you. And I mean, it was just so depressing I didn't want to listen to it anymore. But there's some real good thoughts in country music, and this is one of those songs that it really has a good message to it. Tim McGraw had this thought for a song when his father got cancer, a brain tumor. His dad was a baseball player, professional baseball player, Tug McGraw. He was a relief pitcher, played for different teams, but in 2003, Tug McGraw discovered that he had a brain tumor. And this song is written by his son about that experience. And I want us to think about a few things this morning in connection with this. Anybody remember the movie Bucket List? That was a pretty good movie. And it's pretty typical of the way people think whenever we surprisingly know when we're going to die. I was impressed with that movie for a number of reasons. It was so familiar because about the same time that Tug McGraw discovered that he had a brain tumor, I was told, it's almost to the day, when he discovered he had a brain tumor, I was told that I had lymphoma the first time. And I was thinking about how that did exactly what Michael was talking about. And by the way, Michael, that I don't want to embarrass you, buddy, but that was one of the finest preparations for the Lord's Supper I have ever heard. I sat there crying because it is exactly what I want to talk about this morning. How we should be changed by knowing what's coming. It should really change us. I can remember the thoughts that went through my mind. I can remember how I went over my life. I thought about all the things I had not done, all the things I still wanted to do, the things I felt bad about and the things I felt good about, just the urgency of the next moment. I want us to read this passage from Ecclesiastes again because I want to think about the thought that's contained here and how this fits with what we're talking about this morning. A good name is better than a good ointment. What in the world? Why did Solomon put that in there? And why did he put that ahead of what comes next? He says, and the day of one's death better than the day of one's birth. It's better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting, because that is the end of every man, and the living take it to heart. Sometimes the living take it to heart. But I guarantee you one thing. Every time we go to a funeral, our thoughts will turn to our own death. Every time. And that's a good thing. Because every one of us are dying. We're dying. What we don't realize, what some don't realize, is that some of us are already dead. We just don't know it. And that's where the gospel comes into play. Because we can live this life like it's never ending, and some of us, a lot of us really do live it like it's never going to end. When in reality, there is a day. There is a day when all opportunities are gone. When it's would've, should've, could've, but no longer can. As I read this and I think about the good ointment and a good name, when somebody looks at you and they say, "Oh, yeah," that's a good thing. That's a wonderful thing, especially if that person that's looking at you and saying, "Yes," is your maker. Is the one who put you in this world and gave you the opportunity to do and to be and to whatever your imagination has in store for you. An ointment, on the other hand, what is an ointment for? I've got this little white plastic thing of ointment. And I guarantee you, I would not have that ointment if it weren't for a problem. I've got psoriasis. I hate that. I hate psoriasis. It just makes you miserable at times. And what I know about the psoriasis is that I wouldn't have the ointment if it weren't for the psoriasis. Because an ointment means a problem. It means covering. It means fixing. It means stopping something that is hurtful or harmful. A good name? A good name needs no ointment. It needs no makeup. A good name is... it's what we're looking for when we face God and He says, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Come on in." All of us, though, need an ointment for that. And our ointment is our Savior, who came to clean up our mistakes. Said it's better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting. Why? Because this applies to every person. Dead men walking. That's what we are. Dead men walking. I don't want to be morbid, but I want us to be real about what this life is all about. This life is not for having fun. And we can be very, very selfish with our lives. And it's the way that the disciples were when Jesus was in that garden. And as Michael so clearly pointed out to us, He was getting ready to pay for us. And they cared so little about it, they were snoozing. They couldn't be bothered. It is better to go to a house of mourning because all of us think about what's coming next. I forgot my nose rag, excuse me. All of us will think about the end when we see someone else's end. I want us to think about this song that we got this morning. Live like you were dying. There are two different directions that are taken in this song. One is the selfish side, and I want to thank Jake for making this clear to me because he sent me this song some time back, and I've been looking at it off and on ever since and thinking about the different directions that we take when we face something like this. I'll tell you what, when I faced it the first time, I'm beginning to wonder if the Lord thinks I'm dumb because I've faced it too many times. 4 times I've had cancer. 4 times I've faced this situation. 3 times I've had heart attacks, and 3 times I've had strokes. And one time I had a motorcycle accident that just about taught me what not to do ever again. Did, really. So I'm wondering if I'm just dense or if the Lord just isn't done with me yet. But the two directions that I see in this song, I want to read the words from this song. To put this in perspective, this is when Tim went to visit his dad when his dad had received the news about his brain tumor. They gave him a couple of weeks to live. He wound up living for 9 months. But the song is about the change that came over his father and came over Tim when he was told about his dad. His dad said, I was in my early 40s with a lot of time before me when the moment came that stopped me on a dime. I spent most of the next days looking at the x-rays, talking about options, talking about sweet time. I asked him when it sank in what this might mean, that it really could be the end. How's it hit you when you get that kind of news? Man, what'd you do? And he says, here's his father's response to what you do when you get that kind of news. He said, I went skydiving. I went Rocky Mountain climbing. I went 2.7 seconds on a bull named Fu Manchu. I loved deeper, and I spoke sweeter. And I gave forgiveness I've been denying. He said, someday I hope you have the chance to live like you were dying. He said, I was finally the husband that most of the time I wasn't. I became a friend would like to have. Then Tim writes this. All of a sudden, going fishing wasn't such an imposition. I went 3 times that year. I lost my dad. Well, I finally read the good book. And I took a good, long, hard look at what I'd do if I could do it all again. And then, here's his conclusion. I'd live like tomorrow's a gift. And you've got eternity to think about what you do with it. What could you do with it? What can I do with it? What would I do with it? Good questions, you know. Good questions that if we're faced with that, we momentarily think those things. But I want to point out the difference in the two directions here. Let's go back up to the first part of this song here. When he was asked, what'd you do? Here's what most of us think. And this is the basis of the movie, The Bucket List. I went skydiving. What is it that you want to do that you have not done in your life? Here's the way most of us think when we know we've only got just a short time left. We think selfishly. We think about the things that we want to do that we've never done. Skydiving. You know, this has been on my bucket list for a long time. I want to go skydiving. If George H.W. Bush could do it at, how old was he, 85 or something, I think I still got what it takes to do it. Rocky Mountain climb, my knees aren't good enough. I'm not going to do that. But I've never really wanted to do that. And put 2.7 seconds, ride 2.7 seconds on a bull named Fu Manchu. No, that's not part of my bucket list either. I can tell you that right now. Just the idea of that Fu Manchu, that's got to be a mean bull. I don't want to do that. Those are the selfish things. Those are the things we want to do because we always wanted to do them and we didn't get a chance to. And now we know how much longer we got, and I'm going to fill it with those things that I really, really wanted to do. Let me tell you, folks, the next things on this list are the ones that are important. Here's what he also did. He says, I loved deeper. So often our love is so superficial. You know, it's kind of like the Hollywood air kisses. Yeah. Mean absolutely nothing. We do and say things that are so on the surface that it makes you wonder why in the world do we bother doing that? When the actual sacrificing for each other is the deeper love he's talking about. Being willing to give up for something or someone is what loving deeper really is all about. It's the kind of love that caused this right here, this memorial that we partake of. It's the kind of thing that made him say, oh, I wish I didn't have to go through this. But it's necessary. It's the reason we have sheep dogs for sheep. They will attack whatever, and they'll die in the process to do their job, to save whatever they're shepherding. Speak sweeter. He says, I spoke sweeter. What does that mean? Mushy mushy? Nah, I don't think it has anything to do with mushy mushy. I think it has to do with what Paul said in Ephesians chapter 4, speaking the truth in love. It's important that we tell the truth. But it's also important that we say it in such a way that it's palatable. That we don't turn people away and turn people off by our truth. Speak it like it is. I remember that usually meant be brutal. It usually meant be harsh. It usually meant, I don't care what you feel. Here's what I see as the truth. I am so sorry that I did that in my earlier years. I wish I could back up. I can't. That's why the ointment. That's why my good name needs ointment. It's why I need a Savior, because I'm not what I ought to be. Try as I might. That's why when I realize the end of my life is coming, I need to make some changes. I need to come closer to God. Not further away by doing what I want rather than what's needed to be done. This is a beautiful song filled with things that we need to think about. It's not always what we sing in church that gives us motivation to do the right thing. There are some wonderful thinkers out there that think about these principles on a regular basis. I'll tell you what speak sweeter does mean. It means get rid of all of the vulgarity. It means get rid of everything that's harmful. It means don't say anything that is directed towards destroying someone. But like Paul says, speak with grace so that it might give grace to those who need it at the moment. He also says, here's what I did. I gave forgiveness that I had been denying. How many have said the Lord's Prayer? Raise your hand if you said the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us as we have forgiven our trespassers. We have no right to ask for forgiveness if we're not willing to give it. So the principle of getting forgiveness from God is based on our willingness to give it ahead of time. That's what forgiveness is all about, thanks to Jillian. Forgiveness, not aftergiveness. Has nothing to do with what happens after somebody did something to you. It has to do with us being willing ahead of time to give of ourselves when somebody else wrongs us. He said, someday I hope you get a chance to live like you were dying. I've got a new thought. Not new. It's new to me. Let's live like we're going to live forever. Because he goes on with this. He says, I finally became the husband I wasn't most of the time. I became a friend that a friend wants to have. How many of us use friends for what they can do for us? That's usually what we call a friend. Somebody we can call on to do for us. But what about the opposite of that? Being that person for someone when they need it. Then he says, all of a sudden, now this is Tim talking here. He says, all of a sudden, going fishing wasn't such an imposition. You know what I get from this? His dad had been wanting to go fishing, but Tim was too busy. It was an imposition for him to take time away. Do you know how much they get? Well, how much he gets, he and his wife get per person for a concert in Las Vegas? $1,000 a head. Wow. $1,000 per person to go hear Tim McGraw and his wife, Faith Hill, sing. $1,000 per person. Dad, I would love to go fishing with you, but I can't. Such an imposition. But once you hear the news, once you understand, Dad's not going to be here, all of a sudden, it's not such an imposition to go fishing with your dad. So he says, I went 3 times the year I lost my dad. It does change you. What Michael said about his brother. I remember after I went through my first rounds of treatment, chemo for lymphoma, I remember going to visit the preacher in Empire, California. And it was in the springtime. We were sitting in his backyard, and I was looking at the trees. Wow, are they green? I'd never realized how green the trees were. I said something about it to him, and he says, you don't think it has something to do with what you're going through right now? Yeah, I do. And I can tell you for a fact, I loved deeper. I spoke sweeter. I didn't ride a bull named Fu Manchu. I didn't go skydiving. It's not that I didn't want to, but all of my life I've been professing that I want to prepare to meet my God. It's amazing how much importance that takes on when you realize how few days you have left. That's sweet time that he started meditating as he was looking at the x-rays. My question to you is, are you prepared to die? What would happen to you and to your thinking if you found out today that you had a week to live, 2 weeks to live, a month to live? How would it affect the rest of your days? Would you live like you were dying? Or would you live in preparation? Somebody's doing their bucket list right there. Would you live like you were going to live forever? If you're subject to the gospel call this morning, if you've got anything in your life that you want to get rid of, if you want to get forgiveness of, if you want the ointment that the Lord has provided, won't you come while we stand and sing the song that Randy has for us?